This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first, call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee with your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 an order. Additional terms apply.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Paul.
Good evening. That's Christopher, Paul. And Christopher joins us for a book corner, extra time, to talk about his wonderful book, Alchemy, Browne Clough and Peter Taylor at Hartlepools United. I've got to say, it's a fantastic read. It's a great cover. Before we get into the book, let's have a little bit about yourself. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and your background first, please, sir.
Yes, I'm originally from London, so born and brought up in London, so a bit odd that I should support Hartlepool, but I have and been going to see them since the age of 12, which being based in London was quite difficult because when I started supporting them, there were no fourth division teams in London, so you had to travel even, a bit of a way just to get to away games, and home games were up in the northeast. They didn't happen for a while through a lack of pocket money, but so interested, always interested in the fact that Browne Clough had started his career at Hartlepool, or Hartlepools as it was when he joined the club, and my dad was from South Derbyshire and lifelong Derby County supporter, so he was always a big fan of Clough, obviously, because of the success that Clough had brought to Derby in the late 60s, early 70s. So I was always interested to one day, go into a bit more depth about Clough and Taylor's time at Hartlepool. So as well as reading what Clough and Taylor had written, what biographers had written about their time at the club, I was keen to sort of get back to the newspapers of the time and see what really happened. Some of the get down and dirty with the newspapers and see how it was reported at the time. Let's say.
Now, your background, is this the first book you've written, or have you wrote books before, Christopher?
This is my first football book. I've written 2 previous books. The first one based on the PhD that I did at the University of Nottingham about Britain and Cuba, and the second one about the writer Graham Greene and the story behind the story Our Man in Havana, so everything to do with espionage and Graham Greene's visits to Cuba before and after the revolution and his 1958 spy fiction novel Our Man in Havana set in Havana.
Fantastic. It's a quantum leap, isn't it, from Graham Greene to Browne Clough, both great characters. Yeah. I'm loving the cover. It's a great picture of Browne, and just Browne and not Peter as well, because Browne did take the job. We're going to talk about his time at Hartlepool in a short while, but he took the job on the proviso that Peter Taylor was going to join him. And he did say, or it says in your book, if Taylor wasn't going to join him, he wasn't going to take the job. But first and foremostly, you did reference you're a Hartlepool supporter. You did come from London. Your dad, Derby County. The obvious question, how and why did you get into Hartlepool?
Yeah, that is. Now, I think the initial spark for this was a holiday up in North Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Family holiday. And then just starting, I think I liked the name. I mean, I used to go to Arsenal. Arsenal was the closest club to me. My secondary school was sort of halfway between Arsenal and Tottenham, so we had lots of Arsenal fans in my school, lots of Spurs fans. And yeah, I used to follow their results. Then I wrote to the club secretary, got the address out of the Loftman's football yearbook, wrote to the secretary, said, "Can you give me some information about the club?" And he sent me some programs, which were sort of 75% advertising, very thin affairs, not much in them at all. But there was a picture on one of the covers, an aerial photo of the ground, the Victoria ground, which always fascinated me. And then one year they had a cup run. They beat Terry Venables Palace in the third round. This would have been in the winter of 1977. And then they got drawn away to Ipswich, fourth round of the FA Cup, and that was the first game I ever went to, January 1978, and which in fact was the year that Ipswich went on to beat Arsenal in the Cup 1-0. They beat Hartlepool 4-1, and I caught the bug then and there, really. You know, was impressed by the number of Hartlepool fans that were there for a fourth division team. And every time they played anywhere near London, Aldershot, for example, later on it was Wimbledon, Northampton, Bournemouth, places like that. I used to go and see them, and eventually got to go to a home game. But I think I had to watch them 11 times before I saw them win. They were never a very successful team. Really, and they've had odd moments of success since Clough and Taylor were there, but always been, but always not been particular. It's not particularly prosperous part of the northeast, and they've all struggled financially, really, and also for league survival in terms of re-election applications back in the day.
Yeah, I love the reference that you watched them 11 times before you'd seen them win. I think before Clough, quite a few managers had seen Hartlepool play 11 times before they'd actually won. As you say, they were perennial fourth division strugglers, and in those days, you had to apply for re-election. It's not like in the modern game, you finish bottom, you go into the conference, you had to apply. And they had, and we don't want to give anything away, but they had a few, shall we say, strange ways of applying for re-election, didn't they? And we'll leave it there because we want people to read the book. We want people to buy the book. So where can fans, not just of Hartlepools, but fans of Brian Clough, of Peter Taylor, at the end of the day, this was the first steps on the managerial ladder for two legends of the game. So it's a book that appeals to many, many football fans. So where can people go to buy the books? And let's have your socials. And it's published by the History Press, isn't it?
That's it. So the book is available on all the big sort of book websites like WH Smith, Waterstones, of course, Amazon, I suppose the biggest of all of them in terms of web only, but WH Smith, Waterstones, Wordery, Book Depository. Yeah, I mean, to do a search and you'll find the book quite easily online.
Absolutely. When did you start out on this project, and how long did this labour of love take you?
Yeah, well, as every author will tell you, any book is a labour of love. Yeah. I began this one in the autumn of 2019. I was a bit unlucky, bit jinxed from the fact that just as I was about to undertake the main part of the research, which was newspapers, I mean, I literally had my bag packed, literally had my hotel in London booked, my train ticket booked. Thought I'd just check my email before I left home because COVID was starting to, close things down. And there was an email, British Library, we will be closed from tomorrow. So no trip took place. That was in March 2020. Didn't actually get to see the newspapers until November of 2020. Got there down there for one day. I had 3 days booked. Got down there for one day, and the second day, or the afternoon of the first day, said we're not reopening tomorrow because of the second lockdown. It was a bit frustrating, is not the word. Finally got down there properly in December. 2020, and I was also interviewing the players. But the problem with the players, again with COVID, all the surviving players, and not just players, but the odd journalist who's around at the time, who's still with us. I'm all in their 70s, early 80s, and of course, a lot of them understandably quite reluctant to meet in person because of all the COVID restrictions. So a lot of them I spoke to on the phone, or I met them much later after speaking to them on the phone. So it wasn't ideal in terms of the research, but got into the newspapers. You just get sucked in, especially with all the quotes from Clough, because anything that came out of Clough's mouth was very quotable, as sports journalists found throughout his career.
Absolutely. Did you manage to interview many fans? Did you get up to Hartlepools and talk to the supporters? And did you have a chat with Sentinel?
Well, that is a good question, Paul.
And we'll leave Sentinel.
That was an insurmountable problem, to be honest with you, with the Sentinel. I had to rely. I did speak to Bill Hamilton, who's still with us, who sort of early in his career was the local correspondent on the Northern Daily Mail, which later became the Hartlepool Mail, Scottish by nationality, and one of his first jobs was in West Hartlepool, or the Hartlepools as they were then. Then much later he went on to become a BBC correspondent, actually quite recognisable. If you saw him and heard him, you'd actually recognise him from news programmes. But he'd been Sentinel before Clough and Taylor were at the club, so he was useful to speak to in terms of a little bit background about the club and the ground and the chairman, Ernest Ord. He had a few run-ins with, and so yeah.
What I actually love about the book, again, it is about Browne, Clough and Peter Taylor's time at Hartlepools, but there's a lot of historic content about Hartlepool. It sets out about what that port was like, and it was a really growing port, wasn't it? There was two places. There was West Hartlepool and Hartlepools, and you talk about the background, the historic content, and also how they got to become known as the monkey hangers. We can talk about that because I think that is common knowledge, but it's a great story. And I didn't realise that handicap come from that area as well.
That's it. So, one of the interesting things is the parallels that you can draw between Browne, Clough, the town, and the football club, in terms of them in 1965 all being down on their luck. Browne Clough's career has effectively ended on Boxing Day 1962 with a cruciate ligament injury. He did go on to play 3 more games after a long struggle to regain fitness, but back then cruciate ligament injury was operable, but it was not something that you could really recover from as a footballer. Of course, still a very commonplace injury now. Alan Shearer suffered that injury in his career. Paul Gascoigne did, and came back and played again. But for Browne Clough, it basically finished him off. So he was down on his luck. The town, industrially, was on the way down. The last shipyard had closed in 1962. Unemployment was on the rise in the mid-60s. It was partly affected by decline in the coal industry. Hartlepool, West Hartlepool being the principal coal port in the northeast for a lot of the coal, or nearly all the coal from the County Down coalfields was passed through the port of Hartlepool, so that trade was on the way down. And then you've got the football club. In 5 of the 6 seasons previous to Clough and Taylor taking over, they'd applied for re-election 5 out of 6 seasons. So in terms of the history of the football club, which until that point had never really been very successful, apart from one season under Fred Westgarth, 1956, 1957, when they'd come second in the old 3rd Division North, but didn't get promoted Derby were the only team to get promoted, had never tasted success, and in the first half of the 1960s were right down near the bottom of the Football League. So Brian Clough and Peter Taylor were taking over the least, without exaggeration, taking over the worst performing football club in the country. So they were starting right at the bottom of the football pyramid.
And the broker for the deal was Shack, wasn't it? And again, we don't want to give too much away, but there was another job that Brian Clough could have taken. It was offered to him, and it does have a West Midlands reference to it. So again, if you do want to know who that football club is, you need to buy the book. And also it entails the last team that Brian Clough played against. Again, West Midlands reference. And the last goal that he scored against a few old adversaries, shall we say, and we'll leave that there because we do want people to read the book. But Brian, the football player, a fantastic goal scorer. Clough, I think, received 2 England caps. He believed he should have received a lot more, but there was the perception that although he was the most prolific goal scorer in the country, it was all in League Division 2, which is now known as the Championship, wasn't it? That bugged Cloughy, didn't it?
Yeah, I think that's all true. I think the other thing that you have to mention at this point also is, yes, you're right. You know, all those goals, bar the very last goal that he scored when he made those 3 appearances, his only ever appearances in the first division when he's trying to come back from injury, and he scored 1 goal. Apart from, I've lost my train of thought now. Hold on. Can edit me out. Where was I going with that?
We were talking about Brian, the magnificent player, scoring all the goals. Really peeved that he didn't get more calls from England.
Remember where I was going now. It was the other problem that Brian Clough had with England was he was a disruptive influence in the dressing room. One has to say that while, you know, his big mouth as a player made him unpopular despite all the goals that he scored, made him unpopular at Middlesbrough, and at Sunderland made him unpopular among a few of the players, but particularly the directors. And when he was playing for England, when he was in the squad and travelling with the England squad and not getting in the team, his big mouth rubbed people up the wrong way, big fashion. So, you know, his big mouth, which was a liability in the dressing room as a player, of course, later in the dressing room would be a massive asset as a manager, and also with the press. You know, those golden one-liners, his quick-mindedness were fantastic for, you know, the football journalists loved him throughout his career.
Where did Brian get that personality, that outspokenness, if that's the right word and phrase, from?
Well, it's funny, you mentioned, Paul, fans and people in the Northeast. Some Hartlepudlians, people from Hartlepool and people with a good knowledge of Teesside told me that sort of arrogance, big-mouthedness was not unusual for Teessiders of his generation. Mm-hmm. But in terms of his quick-mindedness and his quick wit, I think he got a lot of it actually from his mother, rather than his father. And he was a lot closer to his mother than his father. Yeah, but I think you know, he's sort of almost born with it. You know, I think he was, you know, came from quite a big family, quite a few brothers, football fans, and it has to be said as well that Clough growing up was more into cricket than football actually. But it was his football-loving brothers that got him playing football and sort of. You know, he wanted to outcompete them. He was always very competitive with his brothers, played alongside them, and obviously ended up being the best of all of them when he got an apprenticeship at his local football club, Middlesbrough.
And born on the 21st of March, 1935 in Middlesbrough. His playing career, we've just had a brief chat about, his England caps, his unbelievable knack about scoring goals, and the way that Bryan was, he could put noses out of joint, couldn't he, and wind people up. But it ended on Boxing Day 1962 against Bury, but he did battle back, as you've alluded to, but it was a long, hard slog back for Bryan. In fact, many thought that he would never be able to make that journey back, but because of the way that Clough was, they almost allowed him to believe that he could get back to what he was, back to his best, but it was a real non-starter. But Clough really wanted to try and almost succeeded.
Yeah, he never really accepted that his career was over until the directors told him that his career was over and took the insurance money on him, and he never forgave them for that. But the whole, that period, 62 to 64, when he was trying to make his comeback, and he made those comeback games the beginning of the 64-65 season, and was definitively retired in December of 64. Left him completely heartbroken. He lived for football. He had left school, he'd done this apprenticeship at ICI, he hadn't proved very successful at that. But the one thing he was good at was football, and he was scoring for fun at Middlesbrough. Then when up the north east coast of Sunderland, was doing the same there. He was, almost practically a goal a game striker, and then one tackle, one collision with an outrush goalkeeper. His career is as good as over, and he sinks very low, very low, very, very hard blow. Obviously a hard blow physically, but psychologically, I don't think he ever got over it, to be honest with you. I think that always stayed with him. But he took it very badly. This is apparently the first period in his life when he hit the bubble. He started drinking, became, in his own words, difficult to live with. But then George Hardwick took over as manager at Sunderland and gave him a bit of a lifeline in terms of, telling him, instead of moping around the corridors causing trouble, get with the youth team, put him in charge of the youth team. And he was pretty successful at that in the latter part of the 64-65 season, until George Hardwick lost his job. Scottish Ian McCall took over and told Bryan Clough that there was no space for him. So that was another blow to add to the blow of having his playing career ended. So he was in a pretty low ebb in the summer of 65.
But he had a good youth team there at Sunderland, didn't he? John O'Hare, who later went on and played many times for Bryan at different clubs, was there as a youth player, as was Colin Todd. And was Billy Kerr there as well? As
Bobby Kerr, yeah.
Sorry, Bobby Kerr, wasn't
Bobby
it?
Kerr, the guy who lifted the FA Cup for Sunderland in 73, yeah.
Yeah. So he had a good group, and reading your book, the players, or what certainly come from the book, is that they hadn't seen much of a ball before Bryan Clough, and Cloughie changed everything, the whole of the training, and they really enjoyed training with Bryan Clough. And again, he wasn't that old, because he was 30 years of age when he took the job at Hartlepools. So, he was a young former player that the players, the young kids, the youth team would have looked up to and really introduced them to the football. And I guess what he did at Nottingham Forest and Derby, this is the tool of your trade, young man. Learn to love it, and they did.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there were all those quotes from Clough about, football not being played in the sky and on the ground. And he transformed the training with the Sunderland youth team, and they did quite well. They got to the semi-final of the FA Youth Cup, which is quite an achievement. Absolutely.
Managers that had a real influence, Alan Browne was certainly one, George Hardwick being another, Bob Dennison, and also Harry Storer was a massive influence. Derby County manager, Coventry City manager, and Birmingham City manager after the Second World War as well. But it was the disciplinarian side as well, wasn't it, of Storer, because Peter played for Harry Storer at Coventry, didn't he? And they, Cloughy being the cricket fan and the cricket player, Harry also played cricket for Derbyshire, as well as being a great player and a manager to boot.
That's right. What it was, it's via Peter Taylor, really, that Brian Clough got to know about Harry Storer.
Yeah.
Obviously,
It can be hard balancing taking care of kids, senior loved ones, and yourself. Remember, it's okay to ask for help. There's a reason 29 million families have turned to Care.com. Find background-checked sitters, nannies, and senior caregivers who can help with everything from watching kids after school to senior meal prep. Whether you need full-time, part-time, or even occasional help, you can view rates and book highly rated caregivers that fit your budget and schedule. Get the help you need with Care.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Taylor, nearly 7 years older than Clough, joined Middlesbrough as goalkeeper. And championed Clough. So, why is this young guy not in the first team? Could see that he was a natural scorer, convinced Bob Dennison to try him in the first team, and he proved to be very successful. And introduced him to Harry Storer, and interested in and followed a little bit his footballing philosophy, especially when it came to discipline. But it was Clough had spent quite a bit of time under Alan Browne at Sunderland until his injury, and his ways of instilling discipline generally and on Clough himself really struck a chord with Clough. He was definitely a big influence on Clough's playing career when he started at Hartlepools with Peter Taylor.
I love the line that you've written in the book, "The flame of alchemic reaction had been lit." I think that could almost be a lyrical line in a song. I think it's fantastic. And the Alchemy, a great title for the book, because it was Alchemy, was it? With Peter Taylor and Brian Clough, it was a match made in heaven.
It was a match made in heaven, I suppose. By the time you get to the end of the book, and of course my main concentration is on the 19 months that they spent at Hartlepools United.
Yeah.
But of course I have to mention what they went on to do. And if you look back at their career as a whole, you have to say that when they were together, they were fantastic. But on those short periods when they were apart, when, for example, Clough went it alone at Leeds United, the infamous 44 days. The people commenting last week that was the exact amount of time that Liz Truss was our Prime Minister, 44 days as well, which didn't go too well either. But also, they weren't really. They were together at Brighton, but they weren't together in the sense. But Clough had never really properly committed to Brighton and Hove Albion, never actually moved down there. He was going down there from the East Midlands. And that didn't work out too well. But when they were together, what they did at Hartlepools in terms of just avoiding re-election was success for Hartlepools United. And the only full season they were there, the 66 to 67 season, they flirted with promotion and ended the season in 8th position, left in the summer of 67, and then the squad that Angus MacLean inherited did achieve promotion the following season, the 67 to 68 season, the club's first ever promotion. And obviously, if you look at what Clough and Taylor did at Derby, taking them from the lower reaches of the second division to League Championship in 1972, and then when after the infamous and disastrous 44 days at Leeds, Clough started by himself at Forest in January 75 and was joined by Taylor in the summer of 76. Of course, what they went on to do there was magical. So the idea of alchemy is, chemistry. When they were together, they were fantastic. When they were apart, the chemistry wasn't there, and they weren't successful. Although, I suppose you could argue that Clough did have some success for himself at Forest in the 1980s and 1990s when he was alone, but it was limited really to League Cups.
Absolutely. But we must mention John McGovern because John was a young player at Hartlepools. It wasn't that Clough and Taylor brought him in. He was already there. Get your hair cut, young man. He was also there. The Boxing Day, wasn't he, when Brian got injured against Bury? And I remember listening and watching John McGovern regarding his time at Nottingham Forest, and he said, it's only a matter of time when we get promoted now that Peter Taylor has joined Brian Clough. And
that's obviously John McGovern had a lot of experience playing under them and knew that Clough by himself at Forest, but when Peter Taylor joined Brian Clough at Forest, that they were really going to do something because it played under them at Hartlepools United and it played under them at Derby County. He'd also, of course, followed Clough in his short time to Leeds and stayed there after Clough was given the sack. But obviously, he saw how disastrously that went when Clough was by himself. But when Taylor joined Clough at Nottingham Forest in the summer of '76, then they started to rock and roll. It was success all the way those next 4 seasons.
And there was only 2 teams in that period at Hartlepools that didn't have floodlights.
That's right. Yeah, one of the interesting things was that by the mid 1960s, every professional football club had installed floodlights except 2, and they were Saltergate at Chesterfield and the Victoria Ground at Hartlepools United. And they installed floodlights during those 19 months that Clough and Taylor were there, and they were inaugurated a Friday night game in January 1967 on a snowbound pitch, sort of game that would never go ahead nowadays, but back in the 60s didn't have quite the same criteria when it came to calling off or keeping games on. And so and Chesterfield turned on their lights for the first time at the end of that year. So they were the last but one team to install floodlights at their ground.
I also found it very interesting, and I didn't realise that it was only after the Bradford fire disaster that they had their ground redeveloped, because it got hit by a Second World War bomb, hadn't it?
Yeah, it was actually First World War.
Was it First World War?
First World War.
Because back even further.
A Zeppelin which had raided the northeast and was just about to recross the North Sea back to Germany, had to jettison its final bombs, and its very last bomb fell on the tiny main stand at Hartlepools United Victoria Ground and actually blasted it to pieces. You couldn't have hit it. Whoever dropped the bomb couldn't have done it if they'd tried, but they managed to do it in the dark. And unfortunately for the Zeppelin and its crew, they were hit by an RAF biplane and nosedived into the sea a mile from the coast in a ball of flames. All of them perished, but as did the main stand, which was replaced by a temporary structure in 1919 after the end of the First World War, and that didn't finally come down, this temporary main stand, until 1985. Following the Bradford City fire, when a lot of the old wooden stands in grounds across the country had to come down on grounds of health and safety, given the tragedy at Rally Parade, Bradford.
We did mention earlier in the podcast about the monkey hangers. We were talking about the plane going down in the sea, but there was a ship, and was the monkey the sole survivor? And is it an actual true story? I mean, I've heard it, and it's in Hartlepool folklore. But was it true? Did they really hang a monkey because they thought it was a French spy?
I think it's widely recognised both locally in Hartlepool and the northeast, and nationally that it's very much a myth, that it never actually happened. But it's a great story.
Yeah, it is.
The final survivor in a shipwrecked French ship off the coast of Hartlepool, being brought ashore. He was wearing a mini uniform, sort of a mascot of the ship. Supposedly interrogated. People interrogated him. Didn't understand a word he said. Presumed he was a French spy, and hung him in the main square. So back in the day when I started supporting Hartlepool, people what people used to say was that if you ever met somebody from Hartlepool, you should ask them who hung the monkey. So that seems to have died out. But what has happened, of course, since then, all football clubs have mascots. Is that the Hartlepool United mascot is a monkey.
Yeah, Angus.
And of course, when Peter Mandelson was the local, and during the time that Peter Mandelson was MP, they decided to have elections for the local mayor, and as a joke, the local monkey mascot entered the mayoral elections, initially at odds of 100 to 1, and actually won the election.
I mean,
so the man in the monkey suit became mayor of Hartlepool.
I mean, how bad would Mandelson have felt to have got beat in an election by a fictional character, a monkey? I love the references to topical news that was going on. So as you read in the book, you're reading about things that are also going on at the time, which really hooks you into not just locally in Hartlepool, but a bit more national slant and sway on the story and the narrative that you're driving through it.
That's it. I tried to, mention a few number ones.
Absolutely.
Including talk about, we've just talked about the famous monkey and monkey hangers in Hartlepool. But the Monkees, the band, the sort of poor replica of the Beatles, had a number one hit during the time that Clough and Taylor were there. I'm a Believer, which was around the time that fans could start to believe that Hartlepool might actually achieve promotion, because they were flirting with promotion at that point. And, the height of Beatlemania, the mini skirt, the mini, all this stuff was going on. George Best was just starting out at Manchester United. And, of course, at the midway point of Clough and Taylor's tenure at Hartlepools United, we had the World Cup.
Yeah.
With North Korea playing in the northeast and actually getting through the group phase. Yeah,
they had a decent run in that World Cup, didn't they?
Yeah, until they met Eusebio at they went ahead, didn't they? And then then Eusebio demolished them basically single-handedly.
Absolutely, it is a fascinating read. It's a great read, published by the History Press. What are your social media handles and pages, etc., that for people listening to the podcast can hook up with you and I'm sure enter a conversation and congratulate you on a fantastic book? And it was a tremendous read. So how can people blow smoke up your backside, Christopher?
Well, that's a question that the publisher asked me, because apparently, and I heard this at a festival the other week, a journalist saying that some publishers, when authors or prospective authors send them proposals, go straight onto an author's social media to see if they've got much of a social media presence.
Yes.
I would say in terms of number of followers on Twitter, very modest. I am on Twitter, but I need to build up my numbers, I think. I'm trying to think what my handle is. I think it's CC _Hull, if I remember rightly, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
One of the things I tried to did the other week to try and promote the book is do a little video promo, which I think is quite good. I could, if you just do a search on YouTube for Alchemy Clough, you'll see the video there. I think it's quite a good little 1.5 minute thing. Gives you a good flavour of the book and the story with some nice photos, a couple of which are not in the book.
Are you doing any book signings? Are you going up to Hartlepool and signing the book? And
I was actually up there the other evening trying to convince the club shop to stock the book, and I think they might.
Good.
They need to speak to the publisher. Book signings, I'm not quite on that level. I don't think. I'd love to say yes, but I don't. I'm doing a talk at the National Football Museum in Manchester in December. So hoping to sign a few books there for those that come along. Doing something at Blackwell's bookshop that's in the pipeline in Nottingham, which is obviously very connected to, Peter Taylor was born and bred there, and they obviously had great success. Clough and Taylor at Nottingham Forest, and I actually studied or worked there, taught there, did my PhD at the university over 9 years, so I got quite a connection with Nottingham. Actually arrived there, talking about Clough and my connection to Bryan Clough, both through my dad and as a Hartlepool supporter. But I arrived at University of Nottingham in September 2004 to start my PhD in the month that Bryan Clough passed away. So there's another coincidence. And the other thing in terms of my connection to Bryan Clough was when I started researching this. I mean, I knew that he'd taken over, him and Taylor, in 1965, but not exactly when. That Clough actually started sort of 11 days after I was born.
Wow.
So there's another connection. I was born on the 9th of November, 65, and Clough started at the club on the 29th of October. So that sort of just felt like a little bit of a coincidence. Happy coincidence.
Absolutely. And what's next for Mr. Christopher Hull? Have you got another football book in you? Because there is the Hartlepools book of Bryan Clough. There is a Derby County Years of Bryan Clough. There's a Nottingham Forest. There's quite a few books. Is there going to be any more Bryan Clough books from you, Christopher?
That is a good question. I would say you're right in listing all the books that there are. There are obviously biographies about Bryan Clough. The biggest one and the most comprehensive one by Jonathan Wilson. He's a very prolific writer on football. He's from Sunderland. There's a book about the Clough and Taylor's time at Brighton. We of course have to mention Damned United. Yes. And the book and the film about the infamous 44 days Clough by himself at Leeds United.
And we also have to say that the film is half fictional. I'm guessing that the book is half fictional.
That was the book, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it advertised itself as fiction based on fact, and I love the book, but unfortunately some of it is made up.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of the author putting himself in the mind of Bryan Clough, who was obviously no longer with us when he wrote the book. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I've tried to do with mine is it's non-fiction based on fact. I've tried to make it as factual as possible. Yeah. And tried to debunk a few myths along the way that do tend to build up over the years.
And we do have to say that the Damned United is fictional. So guys, when you do,
it's loosely based. I mean, of course, Clough was there for 44 days, and it didn't go particularly well. But I think the Clough family were not happy with it and did not cooperate with the project, but particularly unhappy with the film, and cooperated with, I think it was ITV, in producing an hour and a quarter long documentary about Clough, which was released on the evening before the film was released. It's a sort of alternative view of Bryan Clough to the film. So, but no, to answer your question, Paul, nobody has. I don't want to say really, because I might be giving somebody a really good lead. Yeah. But off the record, I'd say, Paul, that somebody could do. I'm not sure if it would be me, but a sort of a thing about Bryan Clough and Taylor from Middlesbrough right to the very end. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? A sort of biography of the partnership.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did the Clough family have anything to do with your book? Did you approach them? Did they have any input?
I didn't contact them. I mean, but maybe I could have.
Yeah.
Maybe I could actually send Nigel and his brother Simon. They're both at Mansfield. Obviously, Nigel as manager and Simon as chief scout, I believe. Send them a copy. I haven't done so yet. I did contact Peter Taylor's daughter.
Yeah. Former
journalist. I didn't really use anything from what did over the phone. But no, to answer your question, I just felt that Nigel and Simon were babies, Nigel was born during the time that Clough was manager at Hartlepools, so I don't think directly they would have any knowledge of his time there. But obviously, again, I think it's in terms of fact and fiction, you're when it comes to family members, you're not going to get an unfiltered portrait of their father from his son, his sons. Do you know what I mean? That's why I really wanted to go back to the players who I felt whose story hadn't been heard really, or hadn't been partially heard, and back to the newspapers, because there's so much that's been forgotten over the years.
Absolutely. And finally, is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't spoken about during this podcast?
You could redo some of the... there's probably some bits I could do a bit better if I was given another chance, but I can't remember which bits. You asked something about the towns, and I didn't really... I suppose we went into it a little bit with the Zeppelin and the monkey. And I think the most interesting thing is that the parallel, which I did mention, between the club, the town, and Brian Clough himself. Absolutely. Them all being, really down on their luck in 1965. Absolutely. And what we want is for people to buy the book so they can read the book and they can make up their own opinion of Brian Clough's wonderful time at Hartlepools United. I think, sorry, Paul, I'm interrupting you and thinking, that this isn't going in recording, and maybe it is, so I should stop interrupting you. But
no, you carry on, you interrupt all your
life. No, the thing I was going to, I suppose you could mention, that I was, looking at the story, reading the newspapers, speaking to the newspapers. It was just like evident just how much, Brian Clough put how much effort he put into making it work at Hartlepools United. 5 out of 6 re-election applications in the seasons before he took over, and some of the managers who'd failed previously, there weren't unknown people at the time. People like Bob Gurney or Bobby Gurney from Sunderland. These were not non-entities, and they had failed. And Clough, by hook or by crook, was going to make it work, and he just threw himself at the job in terms of, multitasking, managing the team, training, and then in terms of the financial difficulties, raising money, going to pretty much every working man's club in Hartlepool to raise money when the club was in danger of going out of existence, going to the point of learning to drive the team coach in case he was needed as well to save money. Making them go to a couple of away games in shared cars because they didn't want to spend money on a coach, and him and Taylor painting the stands and putting a new roof over one of the terraces in the summer of '66. So multitasking manager working sort of 18-hour days to make it work, and they did.
Absolutely made it work. And can I thank you for making this or writing this book and putting it out there so football fans all around the globe can read the book and understand how Brian Clough got into football management. After all said and done, he is my favourite manager of all time, and there will never, ever, ever be another Brian Howard Clough. And
he's a one-off.
Absolutely.
Complete one-off. There'll never be a Clough, and you can't if you turn on YouTube or you hear or see anything of Clough, you can't sort of walk past. You just have to engage with it. You have to listen to him because he's got such a magnetic and engaging presence, and always got, well, you might not always agree with it. He's always got something interesting to say, and says it in an interesting and unique way.
Absolutely, and even with the heavyweight champion of the world, the great Muhammad Ali, Clough, I've had enough. And I think he said, "What are you going to do? I want to fight him." And that was just Browne, larger than life from the beginning to the end. God bless you, and thanks for the memories, and thank you for the book, sir.
Thanks, Paul. I hope your editor has fun editing all that, but hopefully there's some good bits in there.
It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been a great, a wonderful evening talking to you. Chris won't need to do much or any editing because I think you've been absolutely first class, and thank you, sir, for your time.
Thanks, Paul.
We will speak again.
Thanks for having me on. Been a pleasure.
Lovely.
Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Cheers, Paul.
Thanks, Christopher. Thank you.
All the best, mate.
Thank you. And thanks for listening, guys. Cut out of it.